The day Liora stopped waiting for someone to call her name was the day she learned what silence really sounded like. Not the soft hush of snow falling through pine branches, not the gentle quiet of dawn breaking over frozen streams. Real silence, the kind that presses against your chest like a stone, the kind that whispers you were never meant to matter at all. She had been 17 winters old when Alpha Dorian stood before the entire Silver Peak pack during the Harvest Moon gathering and said the words that would carve themselves into her bones. His voice had been steady, almost kind, which somehow made it worse. Liora possesses no notable skills that benefit our survival. Her Omega status brings no strength to our bloodlines. She will remain unmated and unranked. The crowd had not gasped. That was what haunted her most. They had simply nodded, agreed, turned away as if she had already disappeared. Her mother had touched her shoulder once, briefly, before following the others back toward the longhouses. Even that touch felt like goodbye. So Liora had walked into the forest that very night with nothing but a wool blanket and her grandmother's rusted hunting knife, and she had not looked back. Not once. Not ever. That had been 4 years ago. Now she lived in a shed that smelled of damp wood and wild mint, tucked so deep in the woodland that even the pack's hunting parties never ventured close. The structure had been abandoned long before she found it, some old trapper's shelter, with 3 walls still standing, and a roof that leaked whenever the rain blew in from the north. She had stuffed the gaps with moss and mud, patched the worst holes with bark she peeled from fallen trees. The door hung crooked on leather hinges she had stitched herself from a deer hide. It was not much, but it was hers. Every morning before dawn, Liora woke to the sound of birds arguing in the branches overhead. She would lie very still on her bed of pine needles and listen to them squabble over berries and territory, and she would think how strange it was that even birds had more claim to the world than she did. Then she would rise, wrap her threadbare shawl around her shoulders, and begin the work of staying alive. Water first. Always water. The stream lay a 15-minute walk through brambles and low-hanging branches that caught at her hair. She had worn a path there through sheer repetition, her feet knowing every root and stone, even in darkness. The water ran cold and clear over smooth rocks, and she would kneel at its edge with her wooden bucket, watching her reflection waver and break apart with each ripple. Sometimes she wondered if that wavering girl in the water was more real than she was. Back at the shed, she would set snares made from braided grass and bits of wire she had scavenged from the old trapper's leftover supplies, rabbits mostly, sometimes a grouse if she was lucky. She had taught herself to skin them quickly, to waste nothing. Meat for eating, bones for tools, fur for patching her blanket when the nights turned cruel. Her hands had grown rough and scarred from this life. Dirt lived permanently under her fingernails. Her hair, once carefully braided by her mother every morning, now hung in tangles she barely bothered to comb through. She had stopped caring what she looked like around the same time she stopped expecting anyone to see her. The loneliness did not come all at once. That was the trick of it. At first, the solitude had felt like relief. No more eyes judging her, no more whispers that cut off when she walked past. No more standing at the edge of gatherings, invisible and aching. But relief had slowly curdled into something heavier. She would go weeks without hearing a human voice, including her own. She had tried talking to herself at first, just to remember what words sounded like, but her voice had sounded so small and strange in the empty shed that she had stopped. Now she moved through her days in utter silence, and the quiet had begun to feel like a living thing, a presence that watched her, waited for her. Sometimes, on clear nights, she could hear the pack howling in the distance. They would gather on the ridge above the valley, their voices rising together in a song that spoke of belonging and blood and home. The sound would drift through the trees and find her in her shed, and she would sit very still with her hands pressed flat against her knees, listening. They never called for her. Not once in 4 years had she heard her name woven into their song. She was not part of that music anymore. Maybe she never had been. Autumn arrived with brutal swiftness that year, the air turning sharp enough to bite. Liora spent her days gathering firewood, stacking it against the shed's eastern wall where it might stay dry. She dug up the last of the wild potatoes from the clearing and stored them in a hole she had lined with stones. She checked her snares twice each day, desperate to smoke enough meat to last through the hungry months. Winter in these woods did not forgive mistakes. One morning, she woke to find frost coating the inside of her walls, delicate and cruel as lace. Her breath plumed white in the darkness. She had 2 blankets, and they were not enough. Her fingers had gone numb during the night, and when she tried to flex them, pain shot through her knuckles like tiny teeth. This was how it would end, she thought with strange clarity. Not dramatically, not with meaning, just slowly, quietly, freezing in a forgotten shed while the world continued without her. The thought did not frighten her as much as it should have. She forced herself up, forced her stiff legs to carry her to the stream, forced her hands to check the snares even though the cold made her bones ache. 1 rabbit, a small one, barely worth the effort of skinning. But it was something. She carried it back to the shed and built a fire in the small pit she had dug in the center of the dirt floor. The smoke escaped through the gaps in the roof, most of it anyway. Her eyes watered as she worked, preparing the rabbit with movements she had repeated so many times they had become mindless. As the meat cooked, she sat back on her heels and stared into the flames. She thought about her mother sometimes, wondered if the woman ever looked toward the forest and felt regret, wondered if her name ever crossed her mother's lips during those long winter nights when the pack gathered close and told stories. Probably not. People did not waste thoughts on ghosts. The rabbit was tough and gamey, but she ate every bite, gnawing the bones clean before adding them to her small collection. She would carve them into needles later, or use them to reinforce her snares. Nothing could be wasted. Not here. Not when she was this alone. Night fell early now, the darkness swallowing the forest by mid-afternoon. Liora would sit in her shed with the fire burning low, listening to the wind howl through the trees. Sometimes she heard wolves out there, real ones, not her pack. Their calls were different, wild and untethered to anything but hunger. She understood that feeling. On the worst nights, when the cold pressed too close and sleep would not come, she would let herself remember what it had felt like to be part of something. She would remember summer festivals when she was small, before anyone cared about rank or usefulness. She would remember her grandmother teaching her to identify herbs, their fingers stained green from crushing leaves. She would remember the weight of her mother's hand on her head, smoothing her hair before bed. Those memories hurt worse than the cold ever could, because they reminded her that she had once been wanted, however briefly, that there had been a time when her existence had not been a burden to be dismissed. The roof leaked worse as the season deepened. Rain found every weakness, dripping onto her bed, soaking her blankets. She moved her sleeping spot 3 times before running out of dry corners. Eventually, she just accepted the damp, curling into herself beneath soggy wool and shivering through the hours until dawn. Her body ached constantly now, her joints stiff, her stomach hollow even after eating. She was disappearing, she realized, not just from the pack's memory, but from the world itself. Soon there would be nothing left but bones in a forgotten shed, and no one would ever know she had tried so hard to stay alive. The thought should have terrified her. Instead, it felt almost like peace. She checked her snares one gray morning and found them empty. All of them. The forest had gone quiet, the animals vanished or holed up against the coming snow. She walked back to her shed with trembling legs and sat down on the cold ground outside, staring at nothing. How much longer could she do this? How many more frozen mornings? How many more nights listening to a pack that had forgotten her name? The wind picked up, carrying the scent of pine and distant smoke. Somewhere out there, her pack was warm, fed, together, and she was here, alone, fading. Liora pulled her knees to her chest and rested her forehead against them, her breath coming in shallow gasps that had nothing to do with the cold. Her chest felt hollow, her throat tight. She had survived 4 years of this. 4 years of waking up and choosing to keep going, even when every part of her screamed to just stop, to just lie down and let the forest take her back. But that morning, sitting in the dirt outside her broken shed with empty snares and an emptier stomach, Liora finally understood something she had been avoiding. Survival was not the same as living, and she was so tired of merely surviving. The scratching came just before dawn, faint and desperate, like something dying. Liora had been awake already, feeding twigs to her struggling fire, when the sound reached her through the walls. At first, she thought it was a branch scraping against wood, but then it came again, deliberate, frantic, alive. She grabbed her grandmother's knife and pushed through the crooked door, her breath misting in the frozen air. The forest was still dark, that deep blue darkness that comes just before sunrise. Frost clung to everything, making the world look fragile and sharp. She followed the sound to a massive fallen oak 20 paces from her shed, its roots torn from the earth like broken fingers reaching toward the sky. The scratching came from underneath. Liora dropped to her knees in the cold mud and peered into the hollow space beneath the trunk. 2 eyes stared back at her, silver as moonlight, wide with terror. A pup. Her heart clenched hard in her chest. She set the knife down and reached forward slowly, making herself as small and unthreatening as possible. "Hey," she whispered, her voice rusty from disuse. "Hey, little one. It's okay." The pup whimpered, pressed so far back into the hollow that only those impossible silver eyes were visible. Liora laid flat on her stomach, ignoring the cold seeping through her clothes, and extended her hand. She kept her movements gentle, patient. She knew what it felt like to be terrified and cornered. She would not add to this creature's fear. It took nearly an hour, but finally the pup crept forward and sniffed her fingers. When she carefully pulled him free, she nearly gasped. He was smaller than any wolf pup she had ever seen, his fur a strange mix of silver and ash that seemed to shimmer even in the dim light. And his scent, it was wrong. Not bad, just completely unfamiliar. Nothing like Silver Peak wolves. Nothing like any pack she had ever encountered. He shivered violently in her arms, ribs pressing sharp against his skin. "Oh, you poor thing," Liora breathed, and something in her chest that had been frozen for 4 years cracked open just slightly. "Come on, let's get you warm." She carried him into her shed and wrapped him in her driest blanket, the one she saved for the coldest nights. Then she heated the last of her rabbit broth over the fire, blowing on it until it was just warm enough, and offered it to him in her cupped hands. The pup lapped at it desperately, his whole body trembling. Liora sat beside him, one hand resting gently on his back, and felt tears prick her eyes for the first time in years. She had forgotten what it felt like to be needed, to matter to another living thing. "Just for tonight," she told him softly, though she was not sure if she was promising him or herself. "You can stay just for tonight, and then you need to find your way home." But when dawn came and she opened the door to let him leave, the pup simply looked up at her with those silver eyes and did not move. He returned the next morning, and the one after that. By the 4th day, Liora stopped pretending he would leave. She named him Star because of his eyes, and because he had appeared in her darkest hour like something fallen from the sky just for her. She talked to him constantly, her voice growing stronger with use. She told him about her pack, about the rejection, about the loneliness that had nearly swallowed her whole. Star would tilt his head and watch her as if he understood every word. He was strange for a pup, too smart, too aware. Sometimes she would catch him staring at her with an intensity that seemed far too old for his small body, and his scent continued to puzzle her, wild and ancient, like storms and stone. But none of that mattered. He was hers, and she was his, and for the first time in 4 years, Liora did not wake up wishing she had not. 3 weeks passed this way, the happiest weeks she could remember. Then one morning, the forest went silent. Liora noticed it immediately. The birds stopped singing mid-call. The wind died, Even the stream seemed to quiet, as if the whole world was holding its breath. Star pressed himself against her legs, his small body rigid with tension. She reached for her knife, her heart hammering against her ribs. Something was coming, something big. They emerged from the tree line like shadows given form. 4 wolves, each one enormous, easily twice the size of any Silver Peak warrior she had ever seen. 3 were black as midnight, their fur absorbing the light. The 4th was smoky gray, his coat rippling like fog over water. They moved with perfect synchronization, spreading out to surround her clearing, their movements fluid and impossibly quiet for creatures so large. Liora's breath caught in her throat. She had never seen wolves like this, never even heard stories of wolves like this. Star whimpered and tried to hide completely behind her legs, but he did not run. He stayed close to her, as if she could protect him from these giants. The wolves stopped at the edge of her clearing, forming a loose semicircle. They did not growl, did not bare their teeth. They simply watched her with eyes that gleamed with intelligence far beyond animal instinct. Liora's hands shook as she gripped her knife tighter. The blade suddenly felt pathetic and small. What could she possibly do against 4 creatures that could tear her apart without effort? But she would not cower. She had survived 4 years alone. She would not die on her knees. "Stay back," she said, and her voice came out steadier than she felt. "I don't want trouble." The gray wolf tilted his head, and something in the gesture was so distinctly human that Liora's stomach dropped. Then he began to change. The shift was nothing like the smooth, practiced transformations she had seen from her pack. This was brutal and beautiful, bones cracking and reforming, fur receding to reveal scarred skin. Within seconds, a man stood where the wolf had been. He was massive, easily a head taller than the largest Silver Peak warrior. Scars cut across his bare chest and arms like a map of violence survived. His hair was dark and wild, and his eyes, those same intelligent eyes, were the color of storm clouds. He studied her for a long moment before speaking, his voice deep and rough as gravel. "You smell of fear, but you do not run." Interesting. Liora forced herself to meet his gaze, though everything in her screamed to look away, to submit. "This is my home. I have nowhere to run to." Something flickered across his scarred face, not quite sympathy, but close. "Your home?" He glanced at the shed with its leaking roof and crooked door. "You live here? Alone?" She lifted her chin. "Yes." One of the black wolves made a low sound, almost like a whine. The scarred man glanced at it, then back at her. His gaze dropped to Star, still pressed against her legs, and his expression shifted into something unreadable. "That pup," he said slowly. "How long has he been with you?" Liora's grip tightened on her knife. 3 weeks. I found him abandoned. He was starving. And you took him in?" "Yes." "Fed him. Sheltered him?" "Yes." The man took a step closer, and Liora fought every instinct to back away. "Do you know what he is?" Her heart was pounding so hard she could barely hear her own voice. "A wolf pup who needed help. His name is Stellan," the man said, and his tone carried weight. Importance. "He is the youngest son of the Nightshade Alpha. He disappeared nearly a month ago during a raid. We have been searching for him since." The words hit Liora like stones. Nightshade. She had heard whispers of them, a pack so old and powerful they were more legend than real. Warriors who answered to no council, who lived by laws written before memory. And she had been feeding their alpha's son rabbit broth in a broken shed. "I didn't know," she whispered. He was alone and scared, and You cared for him anyway," the scarred man interrupted. And something in his voice had softened. "You, an Omega with nothing, shared what little you had with a strange pup who could have belonged to your enemies." Tears burned behind Liora's eyes. "I understood what it felt like. To be alone, to be unwanted." Her voice cracked. "I couldn't let him suffer that." The 3 black wolves shifted then, their transformations just as brutal and beautiful as the first. They stood as men now, all of them scarred and powerful, and they watched her with expressions she could not name. The first man, Kael, she would learn his name, was Kael, crouched down slowly, making himself smaller, less threatening. You were cast out by your pack. It was not a question, but she answered anyway. 4 years ago. Why? The old wound tore open, fresh and bleeding. Because I was useless to them. Weak, unworthy. Kael's jaw tightened, and the other 3 men exchanged glances that spoke of shared fury. And yet, Kael said quietly, you survived 4 winters alone in these woods. You built shelter, you hunted, you endured. He paused, his storm-gray eyes holding hers. That is not weakness, Omega. That is strength your pack was too blind to see. Something in Liora's chest broke wide open, and she had to bite her lip to keep from sobbing. No one had ever called her strong before. No one had ever looked at her like she mattered. Star Stellan finally emerged from behind her legs and padded over to Kael, who scooped him up gently, cradling the pup against his scarred chest. You kept him safe, Kael said, his voice rough with something that sounded like gratitude. He trusted you. That means something to us. One of the other men stepped forward, younger than Kael but just as scarred. Stellan has never trusted easily, even with us, his own kin. He is cautious. His dark eyes settled on Liora with something that looked like respect. That he came to you, stayed with you, allowed you to care for him. That speaks to your heart, Omega, to who you truly are. Liora could not speak, could not breathe. These enormous, terrifying warriors were looking at her like she had done something remarkable instead of something anyone would do, like she was worth seeing. Kael stood slowly, Stellan still cradled against his chest, and the other 3 warriors moved closer until they formed a loose circle around Liora. Not trapping her, protecting her. The difference made her knees weak. Come with us, Kael said, and it was not a command, it was an offer. An invitation spoken with careful gentleness, as if he knew how easily she could shatter. Stellan has claimed you as his. That makes you pack, whether you carry our scent or not. Liora's heart stuttered. I don't understand. The youngest warrior, the one who had spoken about Stellan's trust, stepped forward. His eyes were warm despite the scars crossing his face. Among Nightshade, when a pup claims someone, it is sacred. Stellan chose you, trusted you with his life. That bond cannot be broken, and we do not abandon those our young ones love. But I'm nobody, Liora whispered, her voice breaking. I'm just a useless Omega who couldn't even— You are the Omega who saved an Alpha's son, Kael interrupted, his tone firm. You are the woman who survived alone when your own pack left you to die. You are strong, resourceful, and kind despite every reason to be bitter and cruel. He paused, his storm-gray eyes softening. You are not nobody, Liora. Not to us. Her name. He had used her name. She had not told him her name. Kael seemed to read the question on her face. Stellan told us, in his way. Tears spilled down her cheeks before she could stop them. 4 years of holding everything inside, 4 years of pretending she did not need anyone, and suddenly these strangers were offering her what her own blood had denied. Belonging. I can't, she choked out, even as everything in her screamed yes. What if you realize I'm not worth keeping either? What if I fail you and you send me away and I have to— Her voice cracked completely. I can't survive being thrown away again. The scarred warrior with warm eyes moved closer, crouching down so they were eye level. My name is Jaro, he said softly. I am Nightshade's healer, and I give you my word, no one will throw you away. Ever. Do you know why? She shook her head, unable to speak. Because Nightshade does not measure worth by strength or skill or what you can provide. Jaro's voice was gentle but absolute. We measure it by heart, by loyalty, by the courage to care for a lost pup even when you had nothing to give. He smiled, and it transformed his scarred face into something beautiful. You have already proven yourself to us, Liora. Now we just want to give you a home. The forest suddenly felt too empty, too quiet, too much like the loneliness that had nearly destroyed her. Liora looked at Stellan, still nestled against Kael's chest, those silver eyes watching her with perfect trust. Then she looked at the 4 warriors who had not flinched from her tears, who had called her strong when her own pack had called her worthless. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay." The journey to Nightshade territory took 3 days. They traveled slowly, adjusting their pace for Liora's smaller steps, stopping whenever she needed rest. It was so different from how Silver Peak had moved, always rushed, always impatient with anyone who could not keep up. Kael walked beside her most of the time, a silent presence that somehow made her feel safer than she had in years. The other 3 ranged around them in a protective formation, and Stellan refused to leave her side, trotting along with his small body pressed against her leg. At night, they built fires large enough to keep her warm. They shared their food without hesitation, giving her the best portions. When her worn shoes finally gave out on the 2nd day, the warrior named Riven, the one with dark humor in his eyes, had carved her a new pair from leather, grumbling about lowland packs who send their people out in rags the entire time. But his hands had been gentle as he fitted them to her feet. Liora kept waiting for the other shoe to drop, for them to realize she was a burden, for the kindness to curdle into resentment. It never did. On the 3rd evening, they crested a ridge, and Liora saw Nightshade's stronghold for the first time. The valley spread below them like something from a dream, mountains rising on all sides like protective walls, stone buildings clustered together, smoke rising from chimneys, gardens terraced into the hillsides. It was bigger than Silver Peak, more permanent, more ancient, and it terrified her. "So many people," she breathed. Kael glanced down at her. "They will stare. I will not lie to you about that. But they will not harm you. What if they hate me? Some might resent an outsider," he admitted, "but you are under my protection, and I am Kael Stormborn, second to our Alpha. Anyone who dishonors you, dishonors me." The way he said it left no room for argument. This was fact, not bravado. They descended into the valley as the sun set, painting everything gold and orange. People emerged from buildings to watch them pass. Liora felt every eye like a weight pressing down on her shoulders. Some faces showed curiosity, others confusion, a few twisted with something darker: suspicion, maybe, judgment. Then someone spotted Stellan. "The pup!" A woman's voice rang out, filled with relief. "They found him!" More people rushed forward, and Liora tensed, ready to be pushed aside, forgotten now that the important thing, the Alpha's son, was safe. But Stellan pressed closer to her leg and made a small, possessive sound. The crowd stopped, staring. A tall woman with silver threading through her dark hair stepped forward, her eyes sharp and assessing. "Who is this?" "This is Liora," Kael said, his voice carrying across the gathering crowd. She found Stellan when he was lost and starving. She fed him from her own supplies, sheltered him, kept him safe for 3 weeks, despite having barely enough to survive herself. He paused, letting the words sink in. "Stellan has claimed her. She is Pack now." Whispers rippled through the crowd like wind through grass. "An outsider. But she's just an Omega. Why would we take in some broken lowlander?" Each word was a knife finding old wounds. Leora's hands shook, and she clasped them behind her back so no one would see. The silver-haired woman moved closer, studying Liora with unsettling intensity. "You cared for our young one." It was not quite a question, but Liora answered anyway. "Yes, ma'am." "Why?" The question caught her off guard. "Because he needed help. Because he was scared and alone, and I—" She swallowed hard. "I knew what that felt like." Something shifted in the woman's expression. She looked at Kael. "You brought her here because of the pup's claim?" "I brought her here because she deserves better than dying alone in a broken shed," Kael said flatly. "The claim just made it official." The woman's lips twitched, almost a smile. "I am Mayra, third to Alpha Thorn. Welcome to Nightshade, Liora." She glanced at the muttering crowd. "Anyone who has a problem with Kael's judgment can take it up with me. Or him. Either way, you will lose." The muttering stopped. Mayra turned back to Liora, her expression softening slightly. "Come," You look half-starved and exhausted. We will find you quarters and food." The weeks that followed were the strangest of Liora's life. She was given a small room in the warrior's lodge, a space with a real bed, and a door that locked from the inside and windows that did not leak. It felt impossibly large after her shed. Too clean, too safe. She kept expecting someone to tell her it was a mistake. But the 4 warriors who had brought her home, Kyle, Jarro, Riven, and the 4th one, Thorn, treated her like she belonged there. Kale was quiet, watchful, always seeming to know when the crowds became too much, and appearing at her side with some excuse to pull her away. He never touched her without permission, never crowded her space, but his presence felt like a shield between her and the world. Riven was all sarcasm and sharp edges, but she quickly learned it was armor. He taught her the layout of the stronghold, grumbling the entire time about having to babysit, but his directions were perfect, and he always made sure she got back safely. Thorn was the largest of the 4, built like a mountain with hands that could crush stone. But those hands were gentle when he showed her how to properly set snares, how to track game, how to fight if she needed to. "Your old pack were fools," he told her once, watching her successfully trap a rabbit. "You learn faster than half our warriors." And Jarro, gentle, scarred Jarro, who seemed to understand without words when the memories became too heavy. Who would sit with her in comfortable silence, or bring her tea, or tell her stories about Nightshade's history until the darkness in her mind receded. Stellan refused to leave her side. He slept curled against her every night, followed her everywhere during the day, and growled at anyone who looked at her with too much suspicion. Liora had spent 4 years alone, and now she was never alone. It should have felt suffocating. Instead, it felt like breathing for the first time. But not everyone was welcoming. She heard the whispers as she passed, saw the sideways glances. Some wolves made it clear they thought bringing in a broken lowland Omega was a mistake. One evening, a young warrior named Dax cornered her near the gardens. "You don't belong here," he said, his voice low and mean. "You're weak, useless. Kale and the others are wasting their time on you." The words were so familiar they barely hurt anymore. But before Liora could respond, Riven appeared from nowhere, stepping between them with deadly grace. "Say that again," he invited, his voice soft and dangerous. "Please, I could use the entertainment of watching Kale tear you apart for dishonoring his protected." Dax paled and left quickly. Riven turned to Liora, his usual smirk in place. "You all right? Why do you all keep defending me?" she asked quietly. "I'm nobody. I can't fight like you. I'm not—" "You kept Stellan alive when he was lost in hostile territory," Riven interrupted. "You survived 4 years alone in conditions that would have killed most wolves within weeks. You learned Thorn's tracking techniques in days when it takes others months." He tilted his head. "Stop measuring yourself by your old pack's broken standards. You're Nightshade now. We don't keep useless wolves." Something warm unfurled in Liora's chest. Not quite belief, not yet, but maybe the beginning of hope. "Thank you," she whispered. Riven's smirk softened into something genuine. "Don't thank me. Just keep being you. It's working out pretty well." The council chamber smelled of pine smoke and old stone, and Liora felt like she was drowning in it. She stood in the center of the circular room while 12 elders sat in high-backed chairs around her, their faces carved from judgment and suspicion. Kale stood behind her, close enough that she could feel his presence like warmth against her back, but he had not been allowed to speak yet. This was her trial, not his. Marianne, a high-ranking female with perfectly braided hair and cold eyes, stood before the council with her arms crossed. She was beautiful in the way sharp things were beautiful, all edges and danger. "I ask again," she said, her voice carrying through the chamber like a whip crack. "Why is an unranked outsider allowed unrestricted access to the Alpha's son? Why does she sleep in the Warrior's Lodge? Why is she given resources that should go to True Pack members?" Elder Rothgar, a man with more scars than skin, leaned forward. "The girl came from Silver Peak, did she not? A pack known for weakness and poor judgment. She was cast out by them," another elder added, her white hair glowing in the firelight. Deemed unworthy, and we simply accept her because a pup grew attached? Leora's nails dug into her palms. Every word was true. Every accusation landed like stones. Marianne smiled, cold and sharp. I think it's obvious what she wants. Power, status. She saw an opportunity when she found Stellan, and she took it. Now she's manipulating our warriors, playing the victim to gain their protection. That's not true, Liora said quietly, and 12 pairs of eyes locked onto her. Then explain yourself, girl, Elder Hrothgar demanded. Why should we allow you to remain? Leora's throat felt like it was closing. She looked at the faces around her, hard, suspicious, already convinced of her guilt. Just like Silverpeak. Just like Alpha Dorian 4 years ago. She had been a fool to think this place would be different. I don't know, she whispered. I don't know why you should keep me. I'm not strong like you. I can't fight like your warriors. I'm just... Her voice cracked. I'm just someone who tried to help a scared pup because I knew what it felt like to be abandoned. How convenient, Marianne said sweetly. The tragic Omega with her sad story. Enough. Kale's voice cut through the room like a blade, and suddenly he was beside Liora, his presence commanding despite not being the highest-ranked wolf there. You want to question her worth? Fine. But do it honestly. Don't hide behind accusations of manipulation when what you really fear is change. Marianne's eyes flashed. I fear bringing someone weak into our stronghold, someone who will become a liability when we need strength. She survived 4 years alone, Kale said, his voice dangerously quiet. 4 years in hostile territory with no pack, no support, no help. How many of you could do the same? Silence. She tracked game, built shelter, endured winters that would have killed softer wolves. Kale's storm-gray eyes swept the council. But you look at her and see only what she lacks, not what she has. That is your failing, not hers. Elder Hrothgar's expression remained hard. Pretty words, Stormborn, but words don't protect packs. Strength does. What happens when enemies come and she cannot fight? Then I will fight for her, Kale said simply, as will Riven, Thorn, and Jarro. As will Stellan when he grows. Because she is pack, whether you accept it or not. This is ridiculous, Marianne snapped. You're all blind. A howl split the air. Long, urgent, filled with warning. Kyle's head snapped toward the sound, his entire body going rigid. Raid. The council chamber erupted into motion, elders rising, warriors flooding in from outside. Liora pressed herself against the wall, trying to stay out of the way as bodies rushed past. All warriors to positions, Elder Hrothgar's voice boomed. Protect the stronghold. Kale grabbed Leora's arm, his grip firm but careful. Stay in the warrior's lodge. Bar the door. Don't open it for anyone but us. Terror flooded her veins. What's happening? Rival pack. They've been testing our borders for weeks. His eyes were hard, already shifting into warrior mode. Promise me you'll stay safe. She wanted to promise. Wanted to hide like he asked. But then she heard the screams. The battle started at dawn and painted the valley red. Liora ran toward the screaming instead of away from it, her heart pounding against her ribs like it wanted to escape. Kale's orders echoed in her mind, but she could not obey them. Not when wolves were dying. The main square had become a war zone. Enemy wolves, massive, vicious things with matted fur and wild eyes, tore through Nightshade's defenses. The clash of bodies, the sound of teeth on flesh, the howls of pain and rage filled the air until Liora could barely think. Wounded warriors were being dragged to the sides of buildings, left bleeding on the cold stone. No one was helping them. Everyone was too busy fighting. Liora spotted a storage barn across the square, its wide doors open. She ran for it, dodging fighters, her lungs burning. Inside, she found stacks of grain sacks and old tarps and empty space. Perfect. She worked faster than she ever had in her life, dragged the grain sacks to create barriers, spread tarps across the floor to keep the wounded off cold stone, used crates to make makeshift beds. Then she ran back into the chaos. Here, she shouted at a wolf limping away from the fight, blood streaming from his shoulder. "In the barn! Go!" He stared at her like she was insane, but he went. She found another wounded warrior, this one unconscious, being dragged by his packmate. "The barn," she told the packmate. "I can help him there." More wounded came. Some walked, some were carried. Liora directed each one, her voice steady despite the terror coursing through her. Inside the barn, she assessed injuries with skills learned from 4 years of keeping herself alive, the knowledge Jaro had been teaching her, the herb lore her grandmother had passed down. "You press here, hard, stop the bleeding," she told a young female holding her wounded mate. "You elevate his leg, keep it above his heart. You find me clean water now." They obeyed without question. More wounded arrived. A warrior with his side torn open, a female with a broken leg, a young male barely old enough to fight, his face covered in blood. Liora moved between them like she had been born for this, her hands steady, her mind clear. She packed wounds with moss, used strips of leather as tourniquets, mixed herbs into pastes for pain and infection. "The bleeding won't stop," someone cried. Liora was there in seconds, her hands pressing firm against the torn flesh. "It will. Keep pressure here. Don't let go no matter what." "I can't breathe," a warrior gasped. She recognized the signs immediately punctured lung. "Sit up, now. Don't lie down or you'll drown." She propped him against grain sacks, adjusted his position until his breathing eased slightly. Shallow breaths, in and out. "Focus on my voice." The barn filled with wounded, and Liora moved between them all, triaging, treating, comforting. When she ran out of supplies, she sent wolves to fetch more. When someone panicked, she calmed them with steady words. When someone asked who put her in charge, she did not answer, she just kept working. Frightened pups huddled in the corner, crying for their parents. Liora directed an older female to watch them, to keep them calm and distracted. Everything was blood and chaos and impossible choices, but Liora did not freeze, did not falter. She had spent 4 years surviving alone. This was just a different kind of survival. The battle lasted 3 hours, though it felt like days. When the sounds of fighting finally died down, when the last of the enemy wolves were driven off or killed, the barn had become a functioning medical center. Liora was covered in blood, none of it hers, and so exhausted she could barely stand. But every wounded wolf was being cared for, every injury addressed. Not a single wolf had died under her watch. The elders arrived in a group, Hrothgar leading them, and stopped dead in the doorway. The barn should have been chaos, dying wolves, panic, blood and screaming. Instead, they found order. Wounded warriors lay organized by severity. Wolves moved efficiently between them, following instructions. The pups sat quietly in their corner, being entertained by stories. Even the air felt calmer, purposeful. And in the center of it all stood Liora, this small omega who they had been ready to cast out hours ago, directing an alpha twice her size on how to properly splint a broken arm. The alpha listened without argument. Marianne pushed through the crowd, her perfect hair now disheveled, and stared at the scene with something like shock on her beautiful face. Kael appeared beside the elders, his armor dented, his face streaked with blood and dirt. His eyes found Liora immediately, sweeping over her to check for injuries. When he saw she was unharmed, something in his expression cracked open relief so profound it hurt to witness. Elder Hrothgar stepped into the barn slowly, his scarred face unreadable. He looked at the organized wounded, at the wolves following Leora's calm instructions, at the lives she had clearly saved. "You were supposed to hide," he said, his voice gruff. Liora met his gaze without flinching, too tired to be afraid anymore. "I heard wolves dying. I couldn't hide while that happened." "You had no training, no authority." "No," she agreed quietly, "but I had hands that could help, and I knew how to keep things from falling apart." She gestured at the barn. "Someone had to do something. And they all listened to you," another elder said, sounding almost confused. "Warriors, alphas, they followed your orders. Leora's laugh was short and bitter. Because I didn't give them time to question. I just told them what needed doing, and they were too desperate to argue. Kael moved to her side, his presence solid and reassuring. She saved more wolves today than my blade did. His voice carried across the barn, making sure everyone heard. While we were fighting, she was the reason any of us will have packmates to come home to. Strength isn't just about fighting, Jaro added, appearing from where he had been helping with the wounded. It's about keeping your head when everyone else is losing theirs. It's about seeing what needs doing and doing it, even when you're terrified. He smiled at Liora. That's exactly what she did. Thorn ducked into the barn, having to angle his massive shoulders through the door. Half these warriors owe her their lives. The other half owe her their sanity. He crossed his arms. Anyone still questioning her worth can answer to me. Riven leaned against a support beam, his usual smirk replaced by something softer. Told you she was working out pretty well. Elder Hrothgar stared at Liora for a long moment. Then, slowly, deliberately, he pressed his fist to his chest and bowed his head, the nightshade gesture of deep respect. The other elders followed. One by one, every wolf in the barn did the same. Warriors she had saved, wolves who had doubted her. Even Marianne, her expression twisted with something complicated, lowered her head. Leora's knees went weak. Kael caught her elbow, steadying her, his grip warm and sure. I think, Elder Hrothgar said, straightening, we have our answer about your worth, girl. His stern face cracked into something that might have been a smile. Welcome to Nightshade, healer Liora. May we never be foolish enough to question you again. The vote took place under open sky. Nightshade gathered in the central valley, ringed by mountains and lit by torches that flickered like captured stars. Wolves filled every ledge and path, some in human form, some in fur, all watching the stone platform where the elders stood. Liora stood below them, feeling very small. Her hands were still rough from patching wounds. Her shirt still carried faint brown stains from old blood. She had slept only a little since the raid, but her eyes were clear, and her spine was straight. She had stopped trying to make herself smaller. Elder Hrothgar stepped forward, his voice booming across the gathered pack. Tonight we meet not to judge but to decide. This Omega from Silver Peak came to us as an outsider, cast off, unclaimed. She has since saved more lives than any single warrior in the last battle. She has shown courage, skill, and heart. The question is simple. Do we accept Liora as one of us? A low rumble went through the crowd. Not angry, just full of feeling. Hrothgar raised a hand for silence. The elders proposed she be given an official role, a new rank, Keeper of the Haven. Murmurs rose. A haven? Mayra stepped forward, her silver-streaked hair catching the firelight. We have long needed a place of safety, she said. For orphans, for injured wolves not yet ready to return to battle, for those broken in ways not seen on skin, Liora has already proven she can turn chaos into shelter. Let her build something new with that gift. Hrothgar's eyes found Liora. Keeper of the Haven, he repeated. Protector of the weak, organizer of healers, the one who stands between fear and those who feel it. He turned to the crowd. All in favor? Howls answered. They rose in layers, deep, sharp, raw, honest. Wolves on the cliffs threw back their heads. Wolves on the ground thumped fists against chests. The sound wrapped around Liora like a physical thing. Not everyone howled, but enough did that the air trembled. Hrothgar lowered his hand. Opposed? A few voices answered, thin against the storm that had come before. The decision was clear. So be it, the elder said. Liora of the lowlands is no more. From this night, you are Liora Nightshade, Keeper of the Haven. He turned, his gaze serious. By our law, one question remains. Who speaks for her? Silence fell heavy. Then boots struck stone. Kael stepped onto the platform first, moving to stand at Leora's right. His armor was cleaned, his hair tied back, but his eyes were the same storm gray she had come to trust. I speak for her, he said, voice steady. Kael Stormborn, second to the Alpha. I vouch for her loyalty with my own life." Riven joined them with his usual sharp grin, though his eyes were soft. "Riven Blackwater?" he said. "Scout, saboteur, pain in everyone's side. I speak for her. Anyone who doubts her can take it up with my knives." Thorn came next, solid as a wall. "Thorn Stonefist," he rumbled. "War Captain. I speak for her. I have trained warriors for 20 years. I know strength when I see it. She has it." Jarro walked up last, his healer's satchel still at his hip. "Jarro Silverhand," he said quietly. "Healer. I speak for her. She saw what needed doing before I did. I will follow her lead in my hall without question. 4 of Nightshade's most respected wolves, all standing at her side." Leora's throat burned. Then a small, clear sound broke through the night. Stellan trotted forward from the crowd, still in pup form, despite the power humming under his strange silver eyes. He sat at Leora's feet, pressed his tiny body against her boots, and tipped his head back. His howl was high and young and full of fierce claim. "Mine." Leora looked down, tears blurring her vision. Her hand shook as she reached to rest her fingers on his soft head. He leaned into the touch like it was the most natural thing in the world. The pack answered his howl. It rolled over her like a wave this time, not distant, not excluding her. Voices lifted around and above and through her, and for the first time in her life, Leora felt the song of a pack with her voice joined to it, even if she made no sound. She was official now, named, ranked, protected, and wanted. That night, after the fire pits burned low and the howls faded into quiet talk, Leora slipped away to breathe. The balcony she chose jutted from the side of the stone hall, looking over the valley. Moonlight silvered the roofs, the paths, the far tree line. The air was cold enough to bite, but it felt clean on her skin. She wrapped her arms around herself and stared at the place that was now her home. Feet sounded behind her. She knew that tread already steady, heavy, sure. Kale stepped out onto the balcony and closed the door behind him, shutting out the noise of the hall. For a moment he just stood there, hands braced on the stone railing, eyes on the same view she watched. "I thought you might be here," he said quietly. Leora let out a shaky breath. "Too many people staring," she admitted. "Too many eyes. I don't know what to do with it." "You handled a barn full of bleeding warriors," he said. "You can handle a few stares." "Blood is easier," she said, surprising herself. "It doesn't ask what you deserve. It just needs you to act." Kale huffed a soft laugh. Then he turned to face her fully, leaning back against the rail so he could study her in the moonlight. "You were incredible today," he said. No teasing, no exaggeration, just plain truth in his tone. "You know that, yes?" Her first instinct was to deny it, to say anyone would have done the same. But that was a lie. She had lived long enough to know not everyone stepped forward when it hurt. "My hands won't stop shaking," she said instead, looking down at her fingers. Kyle reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and took her hand in his. His palm was rough and warm, swallowing her smaller one. "They're not shaking now." She looked up at him. His face seemed different in moonlight, the hard lines softened, the scars catching silver along their edges. His eyes held something that made her chest feel too tight. "Why did you speak for me?" she asked. "You didn't have to. The elders were already leaning in my favor after the raid." "I spoke because it was the truth," he said, "and because I wanted everyone to hear it from my mouth." "Hear what?" "That you matter," he said simply. "That you are not a burden someone dragged here by mistake. That Nightshade needs you. Need. Not pity. Not charity." Her voice went very small. "Do you remember the first time you saw me?" "Yes." She expected some story about the barn. Or the vote. Or the moment she agreed to leave her shed. "It was in your clearing," Kale said. "You were standing in front of a rotting shed, holding a knife that couldn't stop any of us, with 4 of the largest wolves you've ever seen closing in." He smiled slightly at the memory. "You were shaking so hard I could hear your teeth, but you still put yourself between us and Stellan. You tried to make yourself look bigger when you must have felt very small." "I was terrified," she admitted. "I thought you would kill us both." "I knew," he said. "I could smell your fear. But you stood anyway." "No one had ever done that for me when I was small." She blinked. "You?" "My father was not kind," Kale said, voice flat. "I learned early that no one would stand in front of me when the blows came. Seeing you shield Stellan with your own body." He shook his head, eyes distant for a heartbeat. "I admired you from that moment, fiercely." Leora's pulse stumbled. "Admired? You thought we were monsters," he said quietly. "And still, your first instinct was to protect a pup that wasn't even yours. That kind of courage is rare. That kind of heart is rarer." The cold air seemed to fall away between them, replaced by something warmer, sharper. She swallowed. "Do you know when I first felt different about you?" His lips twitched. "Is this where you tell me you fell in love the moment you saw my scars?" She almost choked. "No, I thought you were terrifying." "Fair. It was in the barn," she said. "There was that young warrior with the crushed leg. Everyone was shouting. He was screaming. I was sure I was going to fail him." Her throat tightened at the memory. "Then you came in, covered in blood, eyes still wild from battle. You could have taken charge. You outrank everyone. But you didn't. You just asked, 'Where do you need me?' Like it was the most normal thing in the world to let an Omega order you around." "You knew what needed to be done," he said. "I didn't. Rank doesn't matter when someone else sees more clearly than you." "Rank has always mattered," she said. "To everyone. Except you." "I grew tired of being feared and obeyed," Kale admitted. "I wanted to be trusted instead." She held his gaze. "You were the first one who ever really saw me," she said softly. "Not as a burden. Not as a problem, not as some broken thing to fix or hide. Just as me." The words hung between them, fragile and honest. Kale stepped closer. Only a hand's breadth of space remained now. His scent, pine and smoke and storm wrapped around her, familiar and grounding. "You are not broken, Liora," he said. "You were bent under weight that was never yours to carry. That's not the same." Her voice shook. "I'm still scared. Of all this. Of doing it wrong. Of losing it." His thumb brushed along the back of her hand, sparking heat up her arm. "So am I," he admitted. She stared. "You? You're afraid?" "Every time you run toward danger instead of away from it," he said wryly. "Every time you forget your own safety because someone else is hurting. Every time I realize how much it would destroy me to lose you so soon after finding you." The ground seemed to shift under her feet. "Kale, I won't pretend this is political," he said, cutting her off gently. "It would be easier if it were. If I could tell myself I'm only standing here because Stellan loves you, or because you're important to the pack now." His eyes searched her face with raw intensity. "But the truth is simpler. And harder. I care for you, Liora, not because of what you do, because of who you are. I am proud of you as a leader, yes, but I am drawn to you as a man." Her breath hitched. "You're..." The word stuck, too big to say all at once. "In love with you?" he supplied, a faint, rueful smile touching his mouth. "Yes, I am." The world went very quiet. Leora's first instinct was to step back, make a joke, deflect. Years of being unwanted had taught her not to trust good things. But she had already decided to stop hiding. Her free hand rose slowly, her fingers trembling, and brushed along the edge of one of his scars. He went very still, as if her touch startled him more than any blade. "I thought love was for everyone else," she said. "For ranked wolves. For useful wolves. For people who weren't me." His jaw clenched. "They did that to you?" "Yes." "Then let me give you something different," he said, voice rough. "No ranks. No expectations, no debts, just two people, choosing." She swallowed hard. "I don't know how to be someone's anything." "You already are," he said. "You're Stellan's safe place, Jarro's equal in the healer's hall, Riven's favorite person to annoy, Thorn's quiet pride." His hand moved, fingers brushing her cheek, calluses scraping lightly against soft skin. "And you're mine, whether you accept that name or not." Her heart finally caught up. It leaped, tripped, then settled into a heavy, certain beat. "I love you too," she whispered. The words felt huge and right. I don't know the right way to say it, but when I think of leaving, my chest hurts. When I hear your voice in a crowd, my shoulders loosen. When I see you bleed, I feel like I'm the one hurt. Tears filled her eyes. No one else has ever made me feel like I'm not alone in my own skin. Just you. Something fierce and bright flashed through his gaze. He bent his head slowly, giving her every chance to pull away. His breath brushed her lips, warm in the cold night. Her pulse roared in her ears. Liora closed the distance. The kiss was not wild, not hurried. It was soft, careful, certain. His mouth was warm and steady against hers, his hand cupping the side of her face, thumb brushing the hinge of her jaw. She curled her fingers in the front of his shirt, steadying herself as emotion surged too much, and exactly enough. There was no flash of magic, no shock of fate, just a deep, aching rightness that settled into her bones. Chosen, not forced. When they finally broke apart, breath mingling in the frosty air, Kyle pressed his forehead to hers. "Whatever comes next," he said softly, "we face it together. Not with you behind me. Beside me." She believed him. The next test came faster than anyone wanted. 2 weeks after the ceremony, horns sounded from the watchtowers at dawn, 3 sharp blasts that meant one thing: border breach. Liora was already in the healer's hall, inventorying herbs for the haven. Jaro looked up as the horns blared, his eyes immediately sharpening. "Raid or scouting party? Either way, there will be wounded," Liora said. Old habits would have pushed her to wait for orders, to let ranked wolves decide what to do. She did not wait. "Move the cots closer to the wall," she told the 2 junior healers. "We need space down the center. Gather boiling water and clean cloths, lay out splints and binding strips. And send a runner to Thorn. I need 3 of his steadiest warriors to assist with triage." They moved without question. She stepped outside and found Kyle already armored, his warriors forming up behind him. He strode toward her, gaze sweeping her from boots to hair. "You're not coming to the front," he said. "I know," she answered. "You fight. I'll hold." His mouth twitched with pride. "What do you need?" "Jaro with me for the worst injuries, Thorn's support in moving the heavy wounded, Riven and 2 scouts to carry messages between the lines and the hall." Her voice was calm, clipped. "If you're pushed back, I need to know before bodies start piling at the door." He listened. Truly listened. "Done," he said. Then, without caring who watched, he reached out and squeezed her shoulder once, hard. "Watch your back, Keeper. Watch yours, warrior." Battle met them hours later, not at the gate this time, but along the northern slope where the enemy had tried to slip past patrols. Kale and his warriors held the line with brutal efficiency, pushing the rival pack back rock by rock. Liora did not see any of it. She saw the cost. Wounded arrived in planned waves instead of chaotic floods. Thanks to Riven's quick feet and sharp voice, Liora met each group at the door, eyes scanning, mind categorizing. "Head wound, breathing steady back row, dim light," she barked. "Crushed ribs, blood in the mouth front, to Jaro, now. Broken arm, clean break splint, and send him to rest. Anyone walking and talking helps until they drop." Healers moved like water around her, filling gaps, finishing tasks before she had to name them. The hall hummed with controlled urgency instead of panic. An alpha from a neighboring den arrived carrying his beta, who bled heavily from a torn thigh. His eyes flashed when he saw Liora in the center of it all, but he said nothing, just waited. She knelt by the beta, fingers probing quickly, gently. "The arteries nicked, but not cut through," she said, mostly to Jaro. "We can save the leg if we clamp here." She pressed down, guiding Jaro's hands. The visiting alpha watched her with stunned respect. By the second hour, the rhythm settled into something almost like a dance. Wounds came, Hands moved, voices stayed firm. No one questioned her calls, not even the high-ranked wolves. Kael appeared in the doorway once, blood on his face, sword in his hand. Their eyes met across the hall. He did not tell her to rest, did not pull her away, did not step in front of her. He nodded once, pride and love and trust all wrapped in the simple motion, then turned and went back to the fight. By dusk, the horns changed tone, 2 long notes signaling retreat. Nightshade held. The casualty count was low, lower than anyone expected. Word spread fast. The keeper's strategies saved time, saved motion, saved lives. When the elders came to inspect, they found a hall running like a well-oiled machine, healers swapping out without gaps, wounded sorted by urgency, records already being kept of injuries and treatments. Hrothgar shook his head, almost in disbelief. "You built this in weeks." "No," Liora said, wiping her hands on a cloth. "We built this. I just gave it shape." Word "we" slipped out without effort. The final change came a month later. Where the old storage barn once stood on the edge of the valley, a new structure rose, stone and timber woven together with care. Wide doors stood open to let in light. Windows looked out over the tree line. A carved sign hung above the entrance, simple and sure, "The Haven." Inside, soft beds lined the walls. Shelves held herbs, toys, books. A central hearth burned warm. Pups chased each other across woven rugs, while older wolves supervised, some with scars half-healed, some with eyes still shadowed from battles inside their own minds. Liora stood at the threshold, watching it all. She wore simple clothes, nothing that screamed rank, but wolves moved around her with easy deference. Healers came to her with questions. Warriors checked in before returning to patrols. Pups ran to her first when they scraped a knee or had a nightmare. She walked the central path, pausing to fix a blanket here, check a bandage there, listen to a story about a dream involving flying rabbits. Her laughter came easier now. Her shoulders no longer hunched as if waiting for a blow. At the far side of the room, Thorn was teaching a group of older pups how to brace a splint. "Because, if you can help hold someone together," he told them, "you're as important as the one who takes the enemy down." Riven sat by the fire, dramatically retelling the last raid in a way that made it sound like Liora had thrown the enemy Alpha off a cliff with her bare hands. The pups shrieked with delight. Jaro moved among a group of recovering warriors, gently correcting the way they stretched healing muscles. Every so often, he would glance toward Liora, and the look in his eyes said plainly, "Equal." Outside, the mountains stood like guardians. Inside, warmth and safety wrapped around every corner. She had never imagined this. Never let herself. A soft weight settled at her feet. Stellan, larger now, halfway between pup and young wolf, curled up on her boots and sighed. His silver eyes blinked up at her with sleepy contentment before closing. Leora's hand found his head automatically, fingers threading through his fur. He was still her first claim, the small, lost thing who had changed everything. Arms slid around her waist from behind, strong and sure. She relaxed into the embrace without needing to see who it was. Kael rested his chin on her shoulder, his chest a solid wall of warmth against her back. His scent wrapped around her, mixing with the smells of herbs and smoke and clean straw. "Busy day, Keeper?" he murmured, lips brushing the edge of her ear. "Every day," she said, but there was no complaint in it, just quiet pride. He looked over the haven with her, the pups, the healers, the warriors she had trained in basic care so no wounded wolf would ever lie bleeding and forgotten again. "This was an empty field once," he said. "It was a barn full of fear once," she corrected softly. "Now it's yours," he finished. "Ours," she thought, but did not say. "Do you remember?" Kael asked, voice low. "The girl who lived in a broken shed and thought freezing in the dark would be a quiet way to disappear?" "She still feels close sometimes," Liora admitted. "Like if I close my eyes, I'll open them back there, alone, with nothing." His arms tightened around her, anchoring her firmly in the present. "Open your eyes then. She did. The haven buzzed gently with life. Wolves moved with purpose and peace. 2 young orphans sat at a table drawing crude pictures of wolves under stars. A once frightened mother now laughed as her pup tugged her braid. Outside, Nightshade moved like a single living thing, scouts returning, farmers bringing in late harvest baskets, warriors sparring in the distance. Inside, she stood at the center of something she had not just joined, but shaped. "What do you see?" Kale asked. "Home," she said. Not a place that tolerated her. Not a corner she squeezed herself into. A space that had grown around her, guided by her hands. She was no longer the forgotten Omega standing at the edge of gatherings, invisible and aching. She was leader, whose voice turned chaos into order. Caretaker of the helpless, whose hands steadied pups and veterans alike. Partner to a powerful warrior who chose her not for rank or strategy, but for the quiet, stubborn light in her. Chosen family to an entire pack that had once looked at her with doubt and now with trust. Kale kissed the side of her neck, just below her ear, a simple, familiar touch that still made warmth bloom under her skin. "You didn't find a place to belong," he said, his voice soft but certain. "You built one." Stellan shifted at her feet, pressing closer, his silver eyes opening just long enough to meet hers. He had been the first stone. Nightshade, the walls. She, the heart. Liora smiled, one hand on the pup's fur, the other resting over Kale's, where it circled her waist, and let the truth settle finally, fully, inside her chest. She would never be alone again.